ready to start. My name is Li from China, from China Exim Bank. I will be the moderator for you for this session this afternoon. And we have 4 panelists, very prominent, panelists. Mr. Zhaoxing, who used to be the foreign minister of China for many years. He also used to be the ambassador of China to United Nations and also to the United States. And currently, he plays the role as our president's representative in various occasions. And Minister Mpahlwa.
Yes.
And I tried very hard to learn how to pronounce his name. And he's the Minister of Trade and Industry of South Africa. And also Mr. Tokyo. His name is a little bit difficult for me if pronounced as English. That becomes a sex will. But
It is. It was.
But however, I was told it should not pronounce that way. It should be Mr. Sihali. And he's the chairman of Mobile Fund Holdings Company of South Africa. And he's a very provocative panelist. So we expect he raised a lot of aggressive questions. And then the last one is Minister Sibal, is Minister of Science and Technology and Earth Science of India. So we have a very prominent panelist and to discuss this issue of Asia and Africa. And this is a lot of discussions about the Asians and Africans. It's to me 600 years ago. There's a very prominent Chinese called Mr. Zheng He, who held a very strong trade fleet to come to this part of the continent. And also, I believe India have been in this part of the continent for a long time. But still, China and India are called the newcomers of this continent. I don't want to be a historian to discuss and to investigate whether it's true or not 600 years ago, whether this Mr. Zheng He touched upon South Africa. But anyway, so there's a lot of discussions about the relations between Asia and Africa, what the role Asia can play, what the relations between Asia and Africa, and especially in China and India. And there's a lot of saying, whether the newcomers will come to compete, to raise to the bottom, and to lower the standards set up by former, I don't know who former what, the former commerce, probably. So there's a lot of questions posed, and in what ways Africa can benefit from this relationship or disadvantage from this relationship. So there's a lot of questions. So I want to ask the panelists what their views on all of these issues. I think, can I call Mr. Li Zhaoxing first to give us your views, because China is always sought out as the key new player of Africa, and there's also very mass criticisms from mass media for China's role and China's actions here in Africa, which is quite different from African reactions to the China's performance here in Africa. So could you give us some of your views on all of these issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. But shall I propose that let's invite that common colleague, common friend of ours, whose name alone has wrought such a big excitement among the audience. And his name, indeed, to my ear, sounds very like Chinese. I thank you for the honor you give me for me to speak first. But if our common friend, Mr. Zhaoxing, would love that, I would give the honor, pass on the honor to His Excellency to speak first, instead more my humble self. By the way, I'm also another Li of China. So Moderator Li gave the chance to me, perhaps because I am from his own family. Sir, you don't care?
It's okay.
To speak first?
It's okay.
Please. Please.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I would really begin in addressing this matter by saying I actually think it's a question that doesn't arise, or at least shouldn't arise. I frankly don't understand why there must be questions about a relationship that is developing and growing between the African continent and China, or India, or any other part of the world for that matter. But perhaps one of the most effective ways of dealing with that issue is to look at South Africa in relation to the African continent. Because we have faced this question ourselves. Is South Africa the new colonizer of the African continent? Now, what is the reality? The reality is that, indeed, post-apartheid, in the era of democracy, something which was, I think, quite a big effort on the part of the government to encourage the private sector to accept and get used to the fact that Africa is a place to do business like any other place in the world. It's quite difficult to get South African business to adopt that kind of attitude. But now that they have, part of the new reality is that South African investments into the rest of the African continent actually represent the biggest investments, foreign investments, if I can put it like that, compared to other, even historically, colonial countries. That's part of the new reality. And what has this done? It has created new capacities within the African continent. It has created opportunities for people to work. And there will be things that even we would have found discomfort with. I think in the early days, for example, you would have our supermarket chains going into a country in a manner that actually displaced local growers because they were importing everything from South Africa. But over time, those are matters that we have been able to address. And so the fact that there may have been some negative impact doesn't take away from the fact that you've actually gone in there, you've invested in new capacity, you've created new opportunities in that country. And I think that it's the same story with China. China is growing. China has got a voracious appetite for many things. They are buying anything under the sun to support a growth that has actually taken off in China. A lot of what they need is in Africa. Should we stop them? Should we say they must not buy from us because it's only raw materials that they're buying? Yes, we have to continue to work on developing the possibility for Africa to supply more value-added products to the Chinese market. But to the extent that there is growth and an appetite at the moment that raises the prices and the demand for a good or goods that we have in abundance, why should there be a question about that? There are many, as I conclude, Mr. Moderator, there are many things that we can point to, both in terms of this relationship between South Africa and the rest of the African continent and China with the various countries within the continent. Part of this objective reality is that South Africa does have capacities which many countries may not necessarily have. And what we see developing are mutually beneficial relationships. Countries are able to address their skills needs through some of the capacities that we have in South Africa. Citizens in their countries who used to have to go to Europe or elsewhere for things like treatment or even shopping, they do find it cheaper and easier to come to South Africa to do that. And I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with that. And so I think that the real issue is that all of us accepting that the African continent does require a lot of support, even as it has a lot of issues to address on its own. What we should be engaging with is how best we can support the African continent, how best we can partner with the African continent in enabling it, given some of the unique challenges that it faces, to enable it to meet its own objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I think what you are saying is the trade is a kind of a mutually beneficial thing which people can benefit from these trade relations no matter what is going to be sold or bought. I think this is a kind of a idea of trade, which is mutually beneficial activities. So, Minister Sibal, I think India is also always cited, together with China, as the new player of this continent. So what's your view on this issue?
Well, Lee, I personally think that it's the wrong question. I don't think that, I think the Chinese are engaged with Africa today because Chinese need a lot of resources for their own country. And therefore, most of the trade that's taken place between China and the African continent is in the area of energy. If you look at the India-African scenario, it's something to do with importation of iron ore and ores, mineral resources. And the reason is simple, that Africa has not been able to develop the capacities to exploit those resources. China and India have those capacities, and therefore, and in a growing economy where China is growing at 10% and India is growing at 9.4%, there is enormous need for those resources, and that's how this trade is taking place. It's nothing to do with Africa, India, or Africa, China. I think Africa must empower itself. The answer to Africa lies within the African continent. And different countries have to have different strategies for development. I mean, which part of the world do you ever ask this question? Has the South American continent has a common strategy towards anybody? No. Does the Asian subcontinent have a common strategy towards anybody? No. So why should the African continent have a common strategy towards anybody? Africa, in a sense, is like India, disparate states with different models of development, different strengths. Some are agrarian, some are semi-urban, some are pastoral, different aspects of political stability that we see prevailing in the African continent. So there's no uniformity in that sense. And therefore you can't really talk about Africa, China, Africa, India. What we need to talk about is how can Africa empower itself? That's the question that Africans must answer themselves. And to the extent that they can, in that process of empowerment, take advantage in their bilateral relationship, either with India or with China or with Europe or with the US or anywhere else, I think that what we need to do is to have them empower themselves in the manner they wish. They must design their future, they must charter their future, and it is our obligation in the context that we will live in a world community to participate in that process of empowerment.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Sehali, and I try to be accurate, and you're probably the only private companies among these panelists. So what's your view on this Asia-Africa relations, and how do you see this relationship? Whether the African countries or Africa as a continent can benefit from the relations they have now with China, with India, or with other Asian countries?
Perhaps as the only person coming from business here, my task is to provide credibility to governments. Because people usually don't trust government. So I'm here to give them credibility, unless things change. I think business can only stand to benefit strategically from the political as well as economic relations and other forms of cooperations that are evolving between the African continent on the one hand, as well as China and India on the other. But to benefit from those relationships, one should understand that Africa is coming with 54, I was told this morning, I've been saying 53. 54 countries, 54 governments, 54 GDPs, 54 budgets, 54 different styles. These are emanating from what you find in Africa. Whereas on the other side, we have China being one country and India being one country. So there's a challenge there. It's not as easy as it's Africa, it's China, and India. We stand to benefit because what we refer to as the Chindia strategy is beginning to see this huge, this great demand for natural resources which are found here on the African continent. I think it's an opportunity of a lifetime for a continent such as Africa to have such a great attention and increasing demand for its resources from two countries both having populations of more than 1 billion each. We do business in Africa as well as an African country. And we meet Chinese companies, Indian companies, and are competing and also cooperating with many of them. The challenge for India and China in Africa is going to be to answer your critics. And your critics are located within our traditional trading partners who come from the West. It's well known that in the past they came with policies, colonialism, neocolonialism, financial imperialism, and paternalism. Of course, they are trying to change from those positions, arising out of the African leaders putting, as we were saying yesterday, the agenda of Africa now first, to rectify what has been done on this continent by these partners of old in the past. So I'm saying India and China are going to have to answer and behave in a manner that is seen to be far removed from those accusations. But for us as Africans, they don't disturb us because we believe that the relationship is evolving based on mutual cooperation as well as the will for mutual benefit. There are great demands for African resources, including steel, iron ore, gold, in which we operate, platinum, we supply both nations with those things, coal, as well as what you find in the energy sector. But and I want to stress the point which was made by the Minister Mpahlwa here. It's not merely about China and India investing in Africa. South African companies are very active. As I indicated, we meet Chinese and Indian companies. Our companies operating in Africa in close to 15 countries. Yesterday we published in the Business Day statistics and information about what we are doing on the energy sector. 160,000 square kilometers of acreage in oil and gas. We committed, Minister, $200 million yesterday, just to drill in 9 African countries. It's an African company. Only the drilling program between now and 2008, $200 million. That's not a small amount of money to make holes. Don't ask me where I get that money. It's cheap interest from Japan because I'm connected to Japan since I've got the name Tokyo. So there is that commitment on the part of Africans themselves. And we are not shy in South Africa to say, in line with our cooperation with other African states, we are playing the role of facilitating development as well. But the relationship that has emanated, as I conclude, between the 3 continents, with the understanding that we come with 54 countries, that cooperation can only benefit business. But a watchword here. It's important that there are clear guidelines for corporate governance. But also crucial, there are clear guidelines for country governance, because governance of companies is one thing. But various countries have got to commit themselves to good governance, including India and China as they come into Africa, so that this relationship can be exploited maximally towards the development of the economies of the different areas.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tokyo. And I think you expressed very clearly that this question should be answered by the Chinese and the Indians. And so, Minister Li, you don't want to speak first. Now you are the last. And so why don't you just answer these questions raised by Tokyo, whether, this is really a problem for Africa and Asia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I believe it's now about time for me to confess to you and to all the dear friends and colleagues present here on this forum meeting. There are two real causes for me to decline from speaking first. One, quite secretly, I went to climb the mountain table or the table mountain nearby. I had a good excuse. This is my 11th visit to this great country, South Africa. However, I had never been to Cape Point or Table Mountain. So secretly and quietly, I went out and fled your morning session. However, I got a sore throat because it was terribly windy on top there. So I did need a couple of minutes to take my South African traditional medicine to cure my sore throat. Thank you. I'm feeling much better. Thank you. And two, I prepared my talking points the day before when I did not imagine you would be so kind to me to let me to be the first to take the floor. And my talking point started with this sentence: I agree with the previous speaker's remarks. So thank you for letting me speak now. So I'll start right from here. Also in response to the good question raised by my dear friends and neighbors, Asia and Africa together account for half of the world's territory and 3/4 of its population. Development of these two continents, therefore, has a direct impact on global prosperity and sustainable development. With its rapid economic growth, Asia has become an important driver of the world economy, while Africa enjoys sustained economic growth and new progress in its integration process. Against this backdrop, it is of great significance for Asia and Africa to uphold the Bandung spirit and forge close partnership so that we can better address the challenges of globalization and promote world peace and development. The 2005 Asian African Summit, successfully held in Indonesia, launched the new Asian African strategic partnership. And the 2007 annual board meeting, the African Development Bank held in Shanghai, took as its theme Africa and Asia, partners in development. This testifies to the desire of Asian and African countries for enhanced solidarity, friendship, and cooperation under the framework of South-South cooperation. My country enjoyed profound traditional friendship with African countries. Based on the principle of sincerity, friendship, equality, mutual support, and common development, China has conducted cooperation with African countries in various spheres, contributing its share to economic and social progress in this great continent, Africa. Based on the needs of the African countries, China has done what it can to provide assistance to African countries to enhance their capacity for independent development. Since the inauguration of diplomatic ties between New China and African countries over 50 years ago, China has helped African countries launch over 900 projects, it has cancelled a total of 10.9 billion yuan of debts owed by African countries and pledged to cancel all the interest-free government loans due by the end of the year 2005, owed by all the heavily indebted poor countries and the least developed countries in this continent that have diplomatic ties with us. The mutually beneficial economic cooperation and trade between China and African countries has contributed to economic growth in Africa. Last year, China-African trade reached $55.5 billion, 5.5 times that of the year 2000. China has offered zero tariff treatment to some exports from 29 so-called least developed African countries with diplomatic ties with China. By the end of last year, more than 800 Chinese companies had been set up in Africa, with investment in such fields as infrastructure, public health, agriculture, and education. Cooperation in social development between China and the African countries has helped improve the living standards of African people. Since 1963, 16,000 Chinese medical personnel have been dispatched to some 48 African countries. China has also provided governmental scholarships to nearly 20,000 students from more than 50 African countries and trained 17,000 professionals for Africa. A new type of strategic partnership between China and Africa was forged at the Beijing summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation held in November 2006, featuring political equality and mutual trust, economic one-on-one cooperation, and cultural exchange. During that summit, President Hu Jintao of China announced on behalf of the Chinese government 8 measures to promote China's practical cooperation with Africa and support African development, which have won broad support. Since the beginning of this year, President Hu and several other Chinese leaders have visited Africa with success. On the Africa Day, on the 25th May this year, the foundation stone of the convention center that China announced at the Beijing summit to build for the African Union was laid in Addis Ababa. By the way, the city Addis Ababa means in the local language fresh flowers, perhaps signifying the beautiful future of the African continent, as well as friendship between China and Africa, as well as between Asia and Africa as a whole. Dear colleagues, China-Africa cooperation and a new type of China-Africa strategic partnership have brought about benefits to both sides and offered useful experience for the establishment of a new type of Asia-Africa strategic partnership. Mutual support and mutual assistance between China and Africa is a part of South-South cooperation and part of international cooperation for development as a whole. It is transparent and it has great potential and broad prospect. China will remain active and open and be happy to strengthen dialogue, share experience, and explore cooperation with the rest of the world in a joint effort to make even bigger contribution to peace and prosperity in this great continent, Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Li. I think your speech, your remarks really very substantially described what China has done in the past. And let me place the question both to the audience and the panelists. Are really the Africans afraid of China and India, or Asians or someone else afraid of relations between Africa and China, India? The audience want to participate?
While they are thinking.
Minister, you want to say a few
words? Yes. I think that I would have no sense that Africans are afraid of the Indians, or Africans are afraid of the Chinese. So clearly, that would be a message that is not coming from us. And my sense of it would be that it has a lot to do with countries that have had more long-standing and historical relations with the African continent. And my own view actually would be that to the extent that there may be concerns about relationships that may be developing. I mean, if we were just to take trade with China over the last 5 years has tripled. And nobody, I think, should question the right of Africa to trade with anybody. We are fighting a big struggle in the World Trade Organization for the opening up of the global trading system, for the leveling of the playing field in the area of trade. And so to the extent that there may be concerns, particularly coming from the developed countries, I would be of the view that if they were genuinely concerned, they would move faster in addressing the issues that currently distort and depress global trade insofar as the ability of African and developing countries to trade meaningfully and beneficially. So my view really is that, as I said in my concluding remarks, what we should be engaging with, and I say this again, accepting that Africa has got its own issues to address, and it is addressing those issues. What anybody else should be looking at is how they can partner in a mutually beneficial way with the African continent.
Yes. Let me try and sort of widen the ambit of this debate a little bit. Let's not look at Africa in the African context alone. Africa is part of the global community. So let's look at what the global challenges for us are, and where does Africa fit in and how we can move forward. I think the biggest challenge that the global community is going to face in the 21st century is the challenge of energy resources. As the poor people of the world or the less developed world moves forward, China, India, more and more people are going to get more prosperous. And as they get prosperous, there's going to be increasing need of energy resources. And there is as far as energy resources in the world are concerned, they are diminishing. So one of the biggest challenges in the 21st century is how do you deal with energy, low-cost energy, which is accessible and affordable to everybody in the global community for prosperity. I think that's the first very big challenge that all of us face. Number two, as we talk, the guzzler of energy is the West. 23% of all pollution in the world is caused by the United States of America. And the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which were 280 parts per million in the industrial age, are now 380 parts per million as I talk. And the sustainable level is 600 parts per million. That is almost twice the level of the industrial world. And as I talk, we are at the moment throwing out carbon dioxide, which is about 800 parts per million. Now, The next biggest challenge is how do we have sustainable development in the world, right? And what is the contribution of the West to it? That's 2. Number 3, if you look at the industrial world, most of the industrial world gets their GDP from the service sector, not from manufacturing, not from agriculture, but from the service sector, which is why the 21st century is called the knowledge economy, because the service sector produces knowledge which is sought to be protected through intellectual property legislation. The Chinese economy runs on manufacture, not the service sector, because the service sector will only happen once the Chinese economy becomes a knowledge-based economy, and that's going to happen in the years to come. The Indian economy is basically, growth is generated through the service sector, which is 52% of GDP, as far as India is concerned. The African economy neither has manufacture nor has a service sector which is strong enough. The challenge for the African economies, as I put it, is how to self-sustain itself in the matter of food security. And number 2, how to evolve a knowledge-based institutional structure. Now, that's the 2 biggest challenges, because there's no point lowering tariffs in Africa and letting Western goods come out of Africa and the Africans not benefiting from it. The only way you can benefit from it is to make a strong agricultural base, which is the basis of your economy. 60% of your people live in the rural areas. Increase levels of productivity through inputs in science and technology. Increase productivity through genetic engineering, and have a strong agricultural base. Then at the same time invest in knowledge through institutional mechanisms, invest in education, and invest in health. That's not going to happen with any kind of aid from anywhere. That has to be done by Africans themselves. All that we can do is to create mechanisms to help Africa empower itself, which is what I said in the beginning. So there's no need to be afraid either of China or of India or of the West. We all have to be afraid of where we are going. And we need to be afraid of the fact that if we do not work together as a global community in the area of ensuring that everybody in the world has food security, everybody has energy at low costs, everybody has access to technology, everybody has access, has the right to access to knowledge. Unless we do it together, we'll have to blame ourselves, and we should be afraid of societies in the global community not wanting that to happen. And what we need to do is to make sure that in the future we live in an equitable world where everybody has access to the basic necessities of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe what you are saying is how the African countries can develop. If there's no development happened, I think it's very difficult to get the science and education or knowledge-based economy to take place. So therefore, and again, the question placed for African continent as a whole, how they can develop their economy, and then they can increase their investment in knowledge-based economy or service-based economy. So I see someone raise their hands. Could you give the microphone?
My name is Askar. I come from Egypt, and I represent Arab Contractors, one of the leading construction companies in the continent. Our company is working in 14 African companies and countries and elsewhere. I would like to answer the question raised by Mr. Lee. Are we really in Africa afraid of China? And the answer is simply no. As a matter of fact, it's the other way around. We have enjoyed historically good excellent relationship with China, whether on my country or for Africa as a whole. But being friends, allow me to share some of my thoughts with you. And on my level, you are like policymakers, but I come from the field. I'm a contractor. So whatever you are talking about is transformed at the end at things or projects done by contractors like me. We always fail to understand how the level of pricing or the level of costing that is implemented by the Chinese companies is being realized. I have to be frank. And the fact is that what is happening, as a matter of fact now, is that Chinese companies are expelling other companies out of many markets in Africa. This is reality. I'm happy to work with Chinese companies. It's a fact. It's something good based on the market economy. It's always good to see market forces from all over the place. But we fail to understand how this is being done. This gives rise, actually, frankly speaking, to the ideas that are being now asked. How is China coming here? Is it really based on business? Is it market forces that govern the behavior or the actions of the companies coming here, or what? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I think, I don't know whether one of the panelists can answer the questions.
I just wanted to comment that there's a basic contradiction in what you said at the beginning and what you said at the end. You said very happy with China here, and then you asked the question, what are the Chinese here for? You know, I'd like to know exactly where you stand before we answer your question.
Hello, let me clarify this particular point. I said I'm happy, and I'm still happy. And
Very good. You're being as diplomatic as Foreign Minister Lee when he made his statement.
I am far away from diplomatic. As I said, I come from the business side. But what I've said, as I said, from a friend to a friend, I'm telling you what is being said for the benefit of all of us. This is what is being said, that the reason is so and so. And we don't really understand how. So from the point of being a friend, I want to understand, how do you do it? Because based on all levels of studies and all that, sometimes we feel that the price level is unbelievable. Unbelievable. It is below cost. So how has it happened? This is the question. It's from a friend to a friend.
Thank you. Well, to my Egyptian friend, let me say salam alaikum, or alaikum salam first. I agree with you that you have a reason, like myself. I have a good reason too, to be happy about relations between China and Egypt, as well as between China as a country and Africa as a continent. We are really happy. The market force, you included, is really playing an essential role in upgrading and strengthening partnership between our two countries and between our two continents. Among other things, in Asia, in that continent where my colleague and I are from, India was one of the earliest countries to have diplomatic relations with New China. And in the African continent, I have a good reason to thank you, my friend, though this is perhaps our first meeting, for the fact that Egypt was the very first African country to recognize New China and to set up official diplomatic ties with New China. We will never forget that. And following the good example set up by that ancient country, more and more African countries have started diplomatic ties with China, with the New China. And I'm very proud of this. And in this regard, I'm always so proud to regard myself as an African. Personally, I started my diplomatic career in Africa, in East Africa, in that regard. I spent some 9 years as a permanent diplomat in the African continent. And out of the 53 African countries, I have already visited 47. Sure. And it remains part of my dream to visit the other 6 in this great continent. And I believe it is our common mission to expand not only our political relationship on the basis of mutual trust, not only the cultural exchanges on the basis of mutual understanding and mutual respect. It's also essential for us to work together to make the relations in the field of trade and economic cooperation more substantive, so that more benefits could be brought about to all peoples. Take, for example, we hope we can continue to do a good job or even a better job in developing the joint economic zone in the Nile Canal Delta in Egypt. I wish our 2 countries, experts, technicians, workers, every success in that joint effort of ours. And besides mentioning that famous canal, I want to let you know that the Chinese, fleet has become one of the major users of that canal. We thank you for that too. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Your Excellencies, my name is Chris Kirubi from Kenya. I'm a private sector man, so whatever I say, I'm not speaking on behalf of my government. I think it's very important that you don't tell somebody you are my friend, and then behind the back you go and feed him with something that you kill him. That can't be a friend, really. My issue is China is our friend. We don't fear China. What we're looking for is level playing field. I have a factory in Kenya. I produce products, plastic products, writing instruments, pens. But the other day they raided a factory in China, my principals from France, and they found products alleged made by me, but I don't have a factory in China, with all my marks, with all my Bureau of Standards mark from my country, a whole warehouse full of Hako Industries products. Within Kenya, we have been arresting a lot of containers with these imitation or counterfeit products. Now, how can China help us? Because we cannot develop industries. If within China itself, some people see the successful stories in Africa, and they go and make some cheap copies and send them over in collusion with some of our traders. This really doesn't matter how much aid they give us, because they are killing our capability. And I believe my colleague here was asking, how can they build capacity in their own local contracting if the pricing level is not fair, is not the same? Don't support your industries to kill other local industries. Better take money, give it direct to the government to look after education, HIV and AIDS. You cannot be a friend and a foe. I know His Excellency just talked about his visits to 40 countries in Africa. Next time he goes to 48 countries, they will not be existing because China will have killed all of them. Thank you very much.
Yes, please. You want to say something?
Mr. Moderator, my name is Tim Tahani. I just want to share one perspective in this debate. Lesotho is a very small country, and clearly compared to China and India, we shouldn't be standing like this. But one of the important things, I think, in our cooperation, which we have learned, it's a sense of respect and treatment with respect that the two countries have given to us, even small as we are. And I think it is an essential element in the cooperation between Asia and China to leave space for others to determine our future. And that respect, sense of respect, has characterized the relationship. The second, I think, point I think it comes to our friend from Kenya here. We have textiles in Lesotho, and with the end of the multi-fiber agreement, one of the problems we faced was the influx in our markets overseas, competition from both India and China, Bangladesh and Pakistan. And what we did was to approach the Chinese, and we said, look, it is not your intention to throw us out of business by taking all our markets. How can you work with us to improve our competitiveness? How can we collaborate with you in exploiting exactly the same markets? And a cooperation was started whereby the Chinese have undertaken to train some of our people in the different skills that are much more specialized in the textiles, beyond making just the T-shirts. And I think we are not afraid, as Minister Mpahlwa said, and we should have no reason to be afraid of the two Asian partners, but rather we should seek an engagement in addressing the kind of issues that Minister Sibal referred to. If we are to build a global community, we want a shared growth and we want a shared benefits. And this is where the cooperation should lead to, rather than fear of, yes, there will always be crooks. There will always be. But within a framework of engagement and dialogue, let us jointly fight those fakes and others, rather than stand on the rooftops to throw stones at each other.
Thank you. Since our time is really run out, and I think I will give each of the panelists 1 minute to say a word what they think about these issues. Shall we start from here, Mr. Sibal?
Okay, I'll try and finish it in 1 minute. I just wanted to respond to some of the things that have been said. One of the fears that we in India had was exactly the same as you fear in Egypt and in Kenya. We lowered our barriers. The Chinese goods flowed into India, and as you know that once they flow, it's a tsunami. And our trading communities and manufacturing setup said the same thing, that, we'd be wiped out of business. And I dare say that in some instances they have been wiped out of business. But what we did in the process was we let it flow for a couple of years, and then we realized that in terms of quality, perhaps we are a bit better. And therefore that those businesses came back, turned around, came back, and they are thriving today. That's one answer. For example, take textiles. In textiles, we are much higher on the value chain. We can't mass produce underwears. And we can't compete with China, and we know that, so we've given up underwears. And we start manufacturing high-quality textile items. Leather goods, for example, we've given up shoes. We're exporting to Europe and other parts of the world very high-quality leather goods because we have a processing industry which is exceptionally high quality. And so what we need to do is, you're right, it's very difficult. China doesn't have the kind of, strict intellectual property law that stops the things that you talked about, right? And I think we need to negotiate and talk to each other and bring about a regime that helps us at both ends. But we can't say no to trade, that's number one. And number two, at the same time, we have to be sensitive to each other's needs. And three, we have to find out our unique strengths to actually survive while this tsunami lasts for a while. And I'm sure that each country has the capacity to do that. And there, you can rest assured that as far as my country is concerned, we'd be more than happy to build those capacities so that all of us can prosper together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Lee. So I'll try to make the best use of the 1 minute given by the moderator. To my Kenyan friend, let me say this first. Jambo, habari yako. Muzuri sana, asante. I would like to speak Kiswahili, but perhaps I need interpretation. Well, let me turn back to English. We are good friends. I mean China and Kenya, just like China and the whole continent of Africa. China is not only importing pyrethrum. I don't know whether all the young people know this term. China have been importing a lot of pyrethrum. That's why the Chinese people now are living much longer than before. This is, of course, one of the reasons. Pyrethrum is one unique product of Kenya, which is mostly used for, fighting against mosquitoes and thus fighting against malaria. So we thank our Kenyan friends for exporting their pyrethrum for us. We are also importing a lot of other things from Kenya, such as soda. And that country is really fantastic. They are so rich in soda sauces. I recommend all the friends who have never been to Kenya to go to that country, particularly to go to that lake where soda is indeed inexhaustible. And talking about killing, we are not killing each other. We are helping each other. We are the victims, at least in a certain sense, of the challenges developing countries are now confronted with. We are on the same boat. So let's go on be good partners on the basis of mutual trust politically, mutual benefit economically, and then mutual understanding culturally. I was once in Mombasa, a very good port on the eastern coast of Kenya, where I learned one thing. Our Kenyan friends so modestly told me that the history of Kenya and even the history of East Africa was written with China, the Ming Dynasty, porcelain, and the China wares. I hope together we will write an even more glorious chapter of our common history and the common future. Thank you. In China, young children all know a lot about Kenya, particularly the flamingos, zebras, and the giraffes. So Kenya has already become one of the biggest tourist attractions outside the country. So I believe together we can do a lot of things, including cooperation in the field of tourism. To the friend from Lesotho, let me say, Dumela Dade. I thank you. I love Lesotho. And in my brief stay in that beautiful country, which is the highest country, one highest country in the world, in the sense that not a single inch of land of Lesotho is lower than 1,000 meters above sea level. I love that piece of land. I once wrote an article about that country that attracted a lot of tourists to Lesotho. I called Lesotho an Eden garden on earth, a paradise on earth. So I think we can do a lot, not only in trade, but also in training of the young people. I was so proud that when I was in Lesotho that year, we had even a few professors teaching at the University of Roma, in the outskirts of Maseru, the name of which, by the way, in the native language there means red rock, a lucky color in the Chinese tradition. So I wish all friends in Lesotho all the best and good luck, Dumela. And to all the friends present here, let me quote something I just learned from the Indian civilization. In the first quarter of this year, I was in your country twice, where I learned, among other things, one saying. That is, we have no fear, for Buddha is with us. And to me, Buddha is the same thing as the common interests of all peoples. So let's work for Buddha. Let's work for all peoples. Thank you.
So, Minister.
Well, thank you. From a visit that we paid to China at the end of last year, one of the important insights that one came back with was that China has set its sights on 2020 to double its own GDP by 2020. What must that mean to an African country that is looking at its own growth and that is looking for opportunities, for trade, for investment? So, what is quite clear and what I know is that China sees itself still growing in leaps and bounds up to 2020, by which time it will double its own GDP. And I see a lot of opportunity there for us as African countries to work in ways that are able to benefit from that growth that is going to be taking place in China. And to the extent that we've got things to supply to that market, we should do so. But I don't think we should expect that the Chinese are going to do it for us. Yes. To look at diversification and how you develop value-added products to sell to them. That's what we have to do for ourselves. And I think that we've got, as Africans, to work on structuring relationships with Chinese, with Indians, that give us better benefit. It may be that that's something we can only do over time because we've got so many issues to address. But I think the example that Minister Tahani was citing here we're facing pressure on a particular area. We decided to engage with the Chinese. We did the same thing as South Africa, facing a huge challenge in the area of clothing and textiles. And we decided to engage with the Chinese government to look at how we can cooperate and arrive at an arrangement that gives us the space to better address our challenges. So it is possible, but it's got to come from us. It's not the Chinese who are going to come and tell us that this is what will be most beneficial to you as you enter into a relationship with us. And I think that if we understand that, we'll better engage with the questions of how do we best benefit from relationships that we enter into, whether it be with India or it be with China. Perhaps another point to make is that there is actually diversification that is happening already. There are a number of sectors where you are seeing Indian and Chinese investments that are not in the extractive industries. They are in telecommunications, they are in power plants, they are in food processing, they are in apparel, they are in real estate, in transport, in construction. So there's a lot that's happening. That is the trend that I think we've got to strengthen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tokyo?
A quick word here. Thank you. It's quite clear that the three areas have got great commonalities. More things that would unite us than would divide us. So there's no need to fear ourselves. We're all, in a way, occupied or colonized. We all belong to the South. So South-South becomes the credo here. And all are striving to develop. I mentioned earlier that Africa's issues will be how we deal with these two great giants, where the advantage is on our side because we are coming to demand things. We want to put ourselves ahead of the curve to take advantage of your demands in terms of the minerals, the resources, but also the markets that you want here, with the understanding that it takes two to tango. We also want markets to be opened in your countries for finished African goods. It's nice to come and see zebras in Kenya, but we want to see finished zebra products, bags, shoes, those type of things, easily being exported into economies as well. I said earlier, the relationships between us are sound. They're also historical in the sense that Minister Lee, you said one of our countries in Africa, Egypt, recognized China in 1949 when we became free. I mean, after your 1949 revolution in 56, as you say. We have been recognized here by India. The first country to call for sanctions in the United Nations General Assembly soon after its own independence against South Africa and to champion our cause was India. And one of the few countries to stand behind us, if I have to say certain things, even including helping us in our armed struggle in South Africa against apartheid, was China. I was arrested carrying Chinese weapons, but another day about that. So there is a great historical relationship. China has been helping African countries, liberation organizations, and so on. The political relationship is clear. The challenge is in the economy, so that all of us can work together in the spirit of cooperation, but also of mutual benefit. From the business side, we want to take advantage of that. I'm sure that's why business is all here, to understand how best this can be done. Key to Africa, as I conclude, is because we are disparate economies, regional, I'm sure, Minister, as you've said yourself, regional integration in Africa, so that the African different markets, SADC, ECOWAS, and so on, can come together so that we have bigger markets dealing with China. As for tsunamis, we ask you to keep them Asian. Don't come to us with them. I thank you.
Thank you. Since we are really very much behind of the schedule, so I don't want to spend too much time to summarize. I think 4 panelists already summarized very eloquently and how the Asia and Africa, China, India, and Africa can cooperate. For our Kenyan friends, you can seek for another 5 million tourists to go to Kenya, and then you can imagine how many hotels do you need. So I think to seek for the opportunities of cooperation between China, India, and Africa can really benefit both sides. And let us work together for that purpose. So thank all of you for your active participation and also for the panelists. Thank you.